You're listening to the Educated Cowgirl Podcast, episode 25. Hey Cowgirls, do you struggle with anxiety at shows? Do you want to become stronger and more mobile in the saddle? Well, this is the episode for you. I am so excited about today's episode as I am sharing with you my super fun conversation with Ellie Stiller and Lauren Crivelli from the Elevate Your Ride podcast. Ellie is a personal trainer and Lauren is a mindset coach, and together they are building a business and platform helping riders improve their riding performance, giving them the tools they need to overcome the fears they have when it comes to showing and competing, and so much more. They are both so knowledgeable and inspiring about so many topics that affect equestrian athletes and performance, from the importance of having a growth mindset, what the bounce back percentage is, exercises to help with injury prevention and recovery, and tips to go into your next competition feeling confident. I know I was inspired so much on how I can apply what we talked about to my own plan and goals. So, without further delay, let's get into my conversation with Lauren and Ellie. Hey, and welcome to the Educated Cowgirl Podcast, hosted by yours truly. My name is Abby Carpenter, and I am a cowgirl and equestrian through and through. I started this podcast wanting to make more of an impact in the equine industry. That's why I am making it my mission to help promote the industry to the public through sharing my love for horses through education and bringing other experts and professionals onto the podcast with me to discuss important topics that impact the horse community. So whether you are a crazy horse lady like me, want to learn more about horses, or want to learn more about the industry, you've come to the right place. On this podcast, we will be talking about ownership, horsemanship, fitness, faith, breeds, and so much more. We believe that it doesn't matter what type of saddle you ride in or the breed of horse you may ride. We all contribute to this community to make it great, and that there is always something to learn from the back of your horse. So grab a coffee and get ready to take some notes, and let's get started. This is the Educated Cowgirl Podcast. All right, so welcome back to the podcast, everyone. I am so excited with the guests I have for you today, as these ladies are doing some incredible things in the industry to help with riders' mental and physical fitness. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. To start off, can you please introduce yourselves, share a little bit about your backgrounds, and a fun fact about yourselves?
Hi, so I'm Ellie Stiller, and my co-host and I, Lauren Crivelli, created a podcast called Elevate Your Ride. And so I do that. And then I'm also a personal trainer for equestrians. So I have a fitness business called Lope and Down the Rail Fitness, where I help riders become stronger and more balanced in the saddle. And that's what I do for work. I've been doing the fitness business for, three and a half years now, something like that. So I love it. And then I guess a fun fact about me is I started my business and started the podcast because of an injury that I had. And I really wanted a way I just felt like I needed a way to rehab myself, and I was having a really hard time doing that in the beginning. And so I got certified as a personal trainer, and then just naturally turned into a business, and now I have a podcast, and here we are.
Nice.
And I'm Lauren Crivelli. I'm your mindset coach on the podcast, and so I also do mindset coaching as well as real estate, and I just really have a passion for the horse industry. And so I really like being able to service that side of it. And a fun fact about me is that I was in a Farmers Only commercial.
That is fun. That's really interesting.
Right? Never been on the app though, so let's just put that as a disclaimer out there.
All right. So I think what you guys have created with Elevate Your Ride is so wonderful, and what you're doing for horses and riders is so great. And you've built your business combining the fitness with mental health and how they work together. How did this business idea start, and what is your mission behind it?
It definitely. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Ellie.
No, you go, Lauren. It was actually your idea, so I guess you should Tell everybody why.
I was gonna say it started in my garage. I'm pretty sure it was the middle of summer, probably 105 degrees outside. Ellie was training me, and I said, you know, what would be really cool as I'm just sweating is if we had a podcast. And I'm pretty sure it was probably the most random thing to say, but then we started bouncing ideas back and forth, and I thought Ellie had so much to offer. Not only is she incredibly brilliant and talented, but she's really organized, great business person, and I've just been blessed to be able to have her as my co-host and partner and stuff.
Nice.
Aw. Well, so yeah, so Lauren kind of came up with the idea. And so Lauren had been a client of mine for a while, and she had always talked about wanting to start a podcast. And she was always sending me podcasts and always sending me like motivational clips and books and all this stuff. And I don't know, like I just was never really a podcast person. Like every once in a while I'd like try and listen to them as I'm like going to the barn, but I was never really a podcast person. But Lauren had always wanted to start one. Like you've talked about that for forever.
Yeah.
And I was always like, yeah, like you go and do that and I'll support you, but like I don't want to do it. And then we kind of came up with this idea that we wanted to collaborate together doing like fitness and mental coaching. And so the original idea was to create an app, and that's still in progress, still that will still happen someday, but we just decided for the time being until that could happen that we would start a podcast. And yeah, that was right around a year ago. So we came up with the idea, I think it was last August. And then started it in January, and it's been a really fun ride. And Lauren is the absolute perfect person that I could have ever asked for to co-host with. It's so much fun.
Yeah. No, that's so great. As I was like listening back to some episodes and doing my own research, I can really hear the care that you put into each episode and making sure that every single one of them is helpful for riders. Actually, the other day I was listening to the episode about show nerves when I was riding myself, and I think it really helped me. What would you say should be riders' main goals when they are working on to improve their mindset or get stronger to improve their riding performance?
So in terms of setting goals for yourself and kind of being able to set up a ride when you are heading to the barn is the perfect place to start. So kind of think to yourself, where was I yesterday and where do I want to be? And then figure out what are the steps that it's going to take to get there. So the best thing that you can do is break those down into teeny tiny steps. So these can be your goals for your current ride. So let's just say you're starting off as basic as trying to pick up your right lead. Well, you know, maybe we're going to start with getting the shape at the jog. And that could be your goal for the day, is getting your shape at the jog. Let's not have your goal for the ride be the end goal. Have it be so you have baby steps to get to it, so that way you can feel like you've accomplished something and it's attainable and you're building that foundation and layering it each ride. Another way too that you can set up goals is by being able to talk to a trainer or a friend and have somebody to help you kind of set realistic things, because they can see what you're doing, see what your horse is doing. They know what you guys are potentially capable of, and somebody else might be willing to push you maybe farther than you would if you were to set your own goals, because they might believe in you a little bit more than you believe in yourself at the moment. So being able to have that kind of accountability buddy slash, you know, support system is super key in just this whole journey.
Yeah, I totally agree with Lauren that you need an accountability partner, whether that's a personal trainer or a mindset coach. It doesn't even have to be a coach. It could be a friend. It could be your horse trainer. It could be, you know, it could be your partner. It doesn't really matter who the person is, but you need somebody to kind of check in with you and keep you accountable. And then it's also good to have to keep somebody else accountable, you know, like trying to find that perfect person that pushes you to be better and that you push to be better. That's really important. And then like if you're trying to set a goal with exercise, kind of like what Lauren talked about, you don't, like, let's say that you've never exercised before. You don't want your goal in 6 months to be, I'm going to go, run a marathon and go win at the
Right.
Boston Marathon. You know what I mean? Like, you want to set goals that are realistic and attainable, kind of going off that. If you've ever heard of the SMART goal format, you just want to start small and kind of, again, like what Lauren said, you don't want to start with, like, let's say your goal is in 6 months, you want to be able to have more core stability so that way you can be a stronger horsemanship rider, so you can have better posture and absorb your horse's movement better. So the goal is to create core stability. That's not going to happen over one day, and you're going to need to do more than one type of exercise once a week, right? So you're going to need to create a goal, create a plan, and stick to it. That's really important for sticking for achieving a goal. Is, I think, a lot of times people have a goal and they create a great plan for it and then they don't actually do it. So that's where having that accountability partner is super, super important, to kind of check in with you and be like, hey, did you do the things that you were supposed to do this week? So holding yourself accountable or having somebody else hold you accountable is really important.
Yeah, and I think, and you mentioned this, but another place we struggle is staying consistent and sticking to your plan. So besides from the accountability partner, what are some other little tricks or tips that riders can have to stay on the plan that they've created for themselves, or maybe a coach created for them, or whatever it may be?
I think that a good place to start is figure out what created that first, like what created the momentum, why did you decide that you wanted to get better, and why did you decide to create that goal? Was it a video that you saw on Facebook? Was it a really inspiring rider that you saw at a horse show? Was it listening to a podcast? Like, try and find where you got that original motivation from, and don't let that go. You know what I mean? Like, if you got inspired by a horse show, keep going to horse shows. If you got inspired by a podcast, keep listening to podcasts. Like, don't get so focused on like the achieving the goal that you forget like why you're doing it. I think that's sometimes some people get a little lost in the process of like, oh my gosh, I've been putting in all this work and I don't even remember why I'm doing it anymore. So sometimes you kind of have to backtrack and remember why you started.
Yeah, because we can sometimes get in our heads of like, why am I still going to the gym every day? I don't really, this is so like, it just takes an hour out of my day when I could be doing something else. But then you have to remind yourself, nope, I am taking this hour to better myself so that I'm better for my horse, or I'm better at when I do go to World Show or whatever show you're going to next. So yeah, that's really good.
Yeah, I
okay.
totally agree with what Ellie said there.
All right, so I also think what you're doing with Elevate can do so much for the industry. I know that up until probably the last few years, a lot of riders, myself included, had the thought of, oh, I don't need to work out, or I ride 4 days a week, or I do chores every day, or I don't need therapy because riding is my therapy. Do you think as more people like you are growing these types of businesses and doing these types of things, that riders are starting to see the value in taking care of themselves mentally and physically? And how do you think this will impact the industry as a whole?
Absolutely. I think that, yeah. And I am so glad that people are taking these things seriously, because horseback riding is a sport. And we should treat ourselves the way that other athletes treat themselves. Other athletes have mindset coaches. They have personal trainers. They have psychologists. They have people that do their rehab, and they take their nutrition seriously. They take their recovery seriously. Because if we want to compete at a high level, we need to be able to perform both mentally and physically at a high level. And showing horses, yes, we need to be physically strong, but we also need to be mentally strong, because not only are we having to get ourselves ready to go and perform at a moment's notice, but we have to be mentally strong to be a leader for our horse. And so in order for us to do that for them, we have to get our minds right and be able to show up in the pen and be confident and know what we're doing and what we want from them and be just a good leader on their backs. And I'm just so happy that this is an area that is opening up and that there's so many different people doing it alongside of us to give people options to learn from. It's really exciting to see what it'll do.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I do see the industry kind of changing and focusing more on, not necessarily even just mindset and fitness, but also focusing more on like nutrition and physical therapy. Like I see a lot more businesses that are kind of doing what we're doing, but in their own specific area.
Yeah.
So I know that when I very first started my business, I started doing research for other personal trainers for equestrians back in like April 2020 is when I really started like trying to figure out, okay, who's doing this? How are they doing it? How are they helping people, that sort of stuff. And I couldn't really find anybody doing it the way that I'm doing it. There were a lot of other programs that would create like a general fitness program for people where you paid $30 and they would send you like a general workout plan for how to get stronger as a rider. And I really wanted to focus on working with people as a personal trainer, not necessarily like an online fitness coach. Like there's a little bit of a difference between the two. And I really wanted to take people and look at their exercise history, look at their injuries, look at their goals, and create like a personal program for them. Like I said, I couldn't really find anybody that was doing exactly what I'm doing now. And now I feel like I've seen at least a dozen of those businesses pop up in the last year or so. Like I think that that's one of the blessings that COVID provided, was it changed the game and created a lot more awareness, I think, about like mental health and physical health. And it gave people time to decide if they wanted to work on their fitness or not. And it gave a lot of coaches time at home to be like, well, my gym closed down. What am I going to do now? Should I maybe try and go and work with, be a little bit more niche and try and work from online instead of going to a typical big box gym? So I think that COVID honestly had a lot to do with it, at least from like the personal training side. And I've also seen a lot more like mindset coaching businesses. And we actually just released a podcast episode where we're talking with my physical therapist for equestrians, and she also started her business in 2020. So I think that COVID brought a lot to the industry in that sense.
Yeah, because I think before in the industry, every time people would talk about riders and their physical bodies or their minds, it would always be in like kind of a negative sense almost, with like, I know a lot of, I'm going to pick on them, the hunter jumper space. They had like trainers that were very toxic and were just, the only thing they would talk about with their bodies was, oh, you need to be thinner for your horse to jump. It's like, that's not really a healthy way of thinking. Like I met this one girl who she was already thin, but then her trainer told her she needed to lose another 5 pounds. And I was like, what? So I like that, like, people like you guys and other people are talking about, okay, allow the horse to work, and like not just talk about how thin we need to be. We need to talk about how can I be stronger and more confident. So that's good. Okay, so so I know you guys talk about and specialize mostly with the breed show world. Your topics span probably every discipline can learn something, and every part of the horse world. I know when you were talking about the bounce back percentage, which I found really fascinating, I was thinking about the number of times I have what we call in ranch sorting a blowout or a no time. I'm sitting there thinking, oh my God, I just messed up for like the 5th time. I'm not going to win any money at this show. I just want to go home, even though I had like maybe one more ride or whatever. But then, as you were saying, Lauren, you have to bounce back from that and continue on. Can you talk a little bit more about this theory for those who might not have heard about it before?
Yeah, absolutely. The bounce back, once I discovered that, I was like, this is one of my favorite things, and I get so excited talking about it. So I'm really glad that you brought that up, because it's something that they talk about in golf a lot. So the bounce back for golf is, you almost will never have a perfect round in golf. Something's going to go wrong. So it's how quickly you can get back on track. And so they call that your bounce back percentage. And so you become a great golfer, not by not making mistakes, but by being able to get back on track quickly. And so I think that this can be applied to our sport, any area of the equestrian world, of being able to, because it's going to be very rare that you have a ride where there is no mistake. And so it's a matter of making that mistake as small as possible and getting back on track. So if we can look at it that way, when we make a mistake, we say, that's okay. Everybody else is going to make a mistake too. So how can I bring myself and my horse back on track and be able to recover and be stronger and better for the next maneuver? It's not about giving up, because a lot of times, as you were saying, when we have a bad ride or a bad stop or a bad trip to a pole, we might say, that's it, I'm done. I can't do it anymore. It's just over. But really, you have just as much chance if you just keep going. And also, too, even if maybe you don't have a chance to win, you can still have a chance to teach your horse to be better, to maybe explore a different skill set that maybe you wanted to try, but you were afraid to, because you're like, oh, I got to win this class. I don't want to try cueing my horse this way. Well, now you have an opportunity to. So use those mistakes as an opportunity for you to either grow and try something new, or an opportunity for you to just say, you know what, I'm getting back on track and I'm going to finish strong. It's a really, really great, it's been a game changer for me, for sure.
Yeah, no, I like that. And I think it can be applied also to an injury, coming back from an injury and trying to, because a lot of times, like, I had an injury that really paralyzed me by fear a lot of times. And you can also bounce back from that by using it to make that injury, and kind of, as you're rehabbing and getting back in the saddle, you can kind of make it as small as possible to be like, okay, so once that was a freak deal, it's not going to happen again, and kind of change your mindset in that kind of way, getting back from an injury. Ellie, did you want to add anything to that, or?
Yeah, so I had kind of a similar thing. So why I started my business is because I got injured. I got bucked off my 2-year-old at the time, and it was really hard to come back from it mentally and physically. Honestly, I would say it's been more of a challenge for me coming back mentally than physically. I still have like my own physical deficits that I will probably always have because of what happened. And I've learned how to make peace with that, but I had a really hard time trusting horses again. And that was something that Lauren and I really had to work with together. And she kind of had to be like, give me tools to help work through it. And that was really, really helpful. And I was really struggling with it probably about 6 months ago. And I feel like I've turned a corner on it. So I'm really happy about that. But it's something that you have to work on constantly and consistently. And it's not something that you just overcome and you never look back on it again. It's something that you constantly have to work towards. And I think that's something that can be said both about fitness and about mindset, is you can't just get to a certain level and then stop. Like, you have to work on your fitness and you have to work on your mindset. It's something you have to work on every day. And if you stop, then you're not going to see the benefits from it anymore.
Yeah. No, I can completely understand where your mind is at, because I've definitely had those falls that shake your confidence, and you're just like, oh, you kind of get these like gut feeling in your stomach that you're just like, I can't do this. I can't ride anymore. And you just feel, you kind of have to kind of talk yourself through it. The video, it was from the Olympics, the video of Simone Biles kind of right before she went saying, "You got this," to herself. I had to do that a lot after I broke my arm. And so I had to be like, okay, I got this. But yeah, no, I completely agree. So something that I also wanted to talk about is your episode about limits and fears. And it kind of plays into what we were just talking about, and overcoming those limits for ourselves, and for our four-legged teammate. Can you dive a little bit more into this, and how being strong physically and mentally together can help us become more confident in the saddle and fight back some of those fears?
Yeah, so that was an interesting concept as well, is a lot of the limits that we'll put on ourselves kind of mentally are a lot of times just placed internally as to what we think we can and can't do. It might be because somebody said something in the past to us and we think that that's going to stay with us forever. Let's say somebody said, you're never going to be able to do a lead change. And so then you're afraid and think, well, I'm just not capable of that. Or if somebody said, you're never going to be able to run fast on a horse, well, you're never going to push the limits, right? Sometimes too, the limits can just come from you feeling like you're just not good enough or capable. And if we can sit down and kind of talk with ourselves and figure out where this is coming from and say, okay, but is that really my reality? And challenge yourself to, okay, let's see if we push those limits, what happens? Oh, I actually can do a lead change, or oh, I actually can go a little faster than I thought.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, right, like it's just, you need to be able to be open to growing. And one thing that I talk about a lot too is a growth mindset, is being able to say, okay, this is where I'm at today, but tomorrow I can be better, or this afternoon I can be better even. And just because you have a failure does not mean that that is your limit / reality for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And so just constantly checking in with yourself and saying, is this limit still my reality?
I love that.
And then, yeah, that was a good quote. And then how it kind of pertains to fitness is a lot of times we limit ourselves quite a bit in fitness and in working out. You know, I always say to my clients, especially when they're doing an exercise like a long plank, you know, where you're just in there in that position, just holding it for a long time. I always say to people, your body can hold it. It's whether or not your mind lets you do it, right? Like there's so much mental, like you will never get anywhere if you only strengthen your body. You have to strengthen your mind as well. And you can do that through pushing yourself through fitness. You can do that through pushing yourself through horseback riding. You can do that through, you know, working with a mindset coach. There's a lot of ways that you can strengthen your mental capacity. But if you don't strengthen your mind, you're never going to get anywhere. Kind of like what Lauren said with the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. The growth mindset will say, just because I can't do this today doesn't mean I can't do it tomorrow or in 6 months. And the fixed mindset will say, I can't do this today. I can't do it tomorrow. I can't do it in 6 months. And so if you look at your fitness and say, well, because I can't do this today, I'm not even going to try. So I will never be able to do it in 6 months, you know, or I'm not as good at this thing or this goal as I would like to be. So I'm just not even going to start because I'm never going to get to where I want to be. You know, your mind can be really limiting in your riding and in your fitness. So it's really important to be just as mindful of the thoughts that you're saying to yourself and the way that you're looking at yourself, because that has a huge impact on your performance and your ability to reach your goals.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, continue.
Okay. And like you were saying with fitness being able to be a big part of pushing your limits, having somebody like yourself, Ellie, as a fitness coach to be able to help break some of these things down into smaller goals. It makes me think about when I told you I wanted to do a pull-up, but I said, I can't do one. And Ellie broke it down into the most attainable thing. And at the beginning, I was like, this is so silly. All I'm doing is like barely lifting something. And then we added bands, and the bands were so thick. They basically just held my entire body, and I just had to do that and just a little lift. But then by the end, I was doing 10 pull-ups without a band at all. But it was so nice because I told myself I cannot do a pull-up. There's no way I'm ever going to. But Ellie said, you know what? Let's break this down into bite-sized pieces. Let's spread out the amount of time that we have to accomplish this goal. And we're going to get you there. And you know what? We did. And pull-ups became one of my favorite things to do, which is why.
Oh my God. Yeah, you love doing pull-ups. You do them all the time at horse shows even. They're like your favorite thing ever.
Yeah. That's great. No, I was just thinking about like, yeah, what we were saying, Ellie, sometimes you have to push your mind to have that growth mindset. And so I can't remember exactly what she called it, but Fallon Taylor has talked about it before, where your brain has, I can't remember what she called it, but it's something in your brain that like, it has a name and it kind of it makes you stay where you're comfortable, and it's like this fear thing that you're like, oh, I can't go past this point, but like it's up to us to kind of push our brain past that point to see where we can go. So yeah, and I know there's a name for it, and she called it something, but I cannot remember what it was. um but yeah, it's so good. So we've talked about a lot today, and I've loved every part of it, but is there anything that you feel that we didn't cover that you feel passionate about, that you want to talk about more in the industry or maybe make people more aware of?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I
So
don't know.
for me, I think I'm going to throw this back a little bit to Ellie, but the importance of stability and mobility when it comes to being an equestrian for fitness wise, because I did not place value on that. And I remember the very first workout Ellie and I did, all I had was this little balance pad and no weights. And I had gone from doing heavy lifting, 180-pound squats. Like, I was like, I'm this big, bad, tough workout chick. And Ellie's like, oh, we're just going to work out with this little balance pad. And I kind of laughed and thought, oh, this relationship's not going to last very long, but that's okay.
I'm so glad that's how you thought of me at your first impression.
That's great.
The next day, it was crazy. But that ended up being such a major component to my fitness. I had way less injuries. My riding felt so much better. And I'm not saying one thing led to another, but I won a world championship after working out with Ellie, and we did all those stability things. So
Nice.
It was pretty, pretty neat.
That's
a little plug right there.
That's a really good point. Is Lauren first came to me and she was like super strong. Like Lauren is like way stronger than I am, like in every category. And when she first came to me, I was like, okay, you're strong, but like you're lacking mobility and you're lacking stability. And that's causing some of the issues that she was having. And even though I think that you kind of assumed that we'd mainly keep building your strength and keep lifting heavy. And then when we kind of went, a different way, you were like, like, I'm not so sure about this. But it's really important to build like a really strong base. So I guess that is one piece of advice that I have for people is when you're starting on your fitness journey, or even not if you're starting, but let's say that you've been working out for a couple of years and you're not quite seeing the results that you want, you kind of need to go back to step one and say, okay, can I not squat heavy because I'm lacking mobility in my ankles? Like you kind of have to look at your body. And this is kind of where a coach can come in handy is like, I bet that Lauren, you had never really thought that you needed to work on your mobility and your stability to become a better rider, right? Like sometimes you need that outside perspective of somebody telling you, hey, I know this is what you want, but this is what you need, And so the reason why that mobility and that stability piece is so important is because it builds you a strong base so let's talk about first, like why mobility is important. If you don't have a full range of motion through your joints, like let's take the squat, for example. If you don't have good ankle, knee, and hip mobility, you're not going to have a proper squat form. And the squat is like the king of leg exercises. So you're not going to be able, if you can't squat well, how are you going to strengthen your legs, right? And if you can't squat well, how are you going to post? How are you going to ride your horse? Because if you think about it, posting is kind of like a squat. So if you can't, even though it's not as deep of a range of motion, it's the same biomechanics. So, and then the stability piece is super important. Like let's say that your horse decides to be a little fresh one day and wants to jump sideways. If you don't have good stability, you're not going to be able to stay right on top of the horse. You're just going to fall right off. Or let's say that you're pushing a really heavy wheelbarrow to the manure pile and you step on a rock. And if you don't have good ankle stability, you're going to break your ankle. Like it's really important to not just for riding, but just for general function, just having a really good functional body in general is really helpful for like injury prevention, right? You can't ride your horse if you're in an ankle boot, or if you broke your rib because you fell and you weren't working on your injury prevention, so you got hurt. You know what I mean? So I think that don't sleep on the mobility and the stability and, you know, and the injury prevention stuff. If you don't have those pieces, then you're never going to get anywhere in your fitness.
Yeah. When people are first starting out and they don't really, and a lot of people kind of get intimidated by going to a gym, do you have any like good beginner exercises that people can start to do to start to get that stability and mobility?
So I have probably 30-ish clients at the moment. Not a single one of them works out in a gym. You do not need to work out in a gym to be a stronger equestrian and to be mobile and stable and strong. You know, I honestly, myself, I rarely pick up a dumbbell that's heavier than 20 pounds. I will sometimes for some specific exercises, but working on like maximal strength is not something that translates really well over into the equestrian sports. It can honestly backtrack you a little bit if you get too strong, because when you get too strong, you're going to get really bulky and it's not going to be easy for your joints to move through a full range of motion, which is, you know, obviously really important for riding. Yeah. And so I would say there's a million things that you can do at home, and you kind of have to evaluate yourself or have a coach evaluate you to know with where you need to start. So for riders, I would say the biggest pieces of mobility that people need to have, you need to have good ankle mobility, you need to have good hip mobility, and you need to have good shoulder mobility. If you don't have mobility in your ankles, you're not going to be able to communicate with your feet well, which doesn't matter as much for some disciplines, but Lauren and I mainly ride the all-around disciplines. So for the trail, the horsemanship, the Western pleasure, if you don't have good stability and mobility through your ankles, you're not going to be able to communicate with your horse well at all. And then if you don't have mobile hips, that's for every discipline. Doesn't matter what discipline you ride. If you don't have mobile hips, you're not going to be able to communicate with your horse through your seat. You're not going to be able to flow through the movements, especially at the lope. You're going to have a really, really hard time loping if you don't have good movement through your hips. So working on that hip mobility is super important. And then your shoulder mobility. So a lot of times, a lot of people sit at desk jobs all day long and their shoulders are constantly put in this rounded forward position. And then you ask people to go get on a horse and they're like, why can't I put my shoulders back? And it's like, well, because you don't have any shoulder mobility. So no wonder why your trainer's yelling at you all the time. So honestly, there's a million ways to increase your ankle mobility, your hip mobility, and your shoulder mobility. You can literally look up a video on YouTube or look it up on Google. But my favorite like ankle mobility exercises are to literally just do ankle circles. Lay on your back, stick your leg up in the air and draw circles with your ankle. Just go slow, go 10 each direction. It doesn't need to be complicated. If you did that a couple times a week, let's say 2 or 3 times a week before you could do it in bed when you're laying in bed. Like you don't even have to, that is not, all of these mobility exercises are something that's super easy to do at home. And like I said, that one you can even do from your bed. So that's what I do for ankle mobility. For hip mobility, there's this exercise called 90-90s, which is kind of a more complicated exercise. And I'm not really sure how I would explain it over the podcast without being able to show people how to do it. But just look up 90-90 hip exercise on Google or on YouTube. And that is my number one favorite hip mobility exercise. You could also be like Lauren and sit on your yoga ball and draw circles with your hips and pretend that you're loping your horse.
That's pretty fun.
Yeah. So if you need
a
more fun way, then you could honestly, it's a good hip mobility exercise and it mimics riding, right? Just sit on a yoga ball and draw 10 circles each direction with your hips. That's a great way to help with that. Yeah. And then for shoulder mobility, just make it simple and just do arm circles. Just lift your arms up over your head and then down and in front of you, and then back up and behind you and down and in front of you. Just as big of a full range of motion arm circle as you can get, and do 10 forward arm circles and 10 reverse arm circles. So those 3 exercises, focusing on the ankle, the hip, and the shoulder mobility, those will literally take you less than 10 minutes. If you do those 2 or 3 times a week, couple or 2 or 3 times a week, that's going to help you so much. And then once you kind of build that mobility base, then you can kind of say, okay, well, what else am I lacking? And kind of go from there. So the hardest part is determining like where you need help. And then once you can figure out like where you need that help, then honestly, Google's a great tool. Social media can be a great tool for figuring out exercises to strengthen the area that you're weak. So finding a coach, it doesn't have to be an equestrian specific personal trainer. You could just find a personal trainer to evaluate you and kind of tell you where you're lacking strength, where you're lacking mobility, and help you build on those pieces. And that would be a really, really good place to start.
Perfect. Yeah, I love that. So good. Okay, so in your own definitions, what does it mean to you to be an educated cowgirl?
Do you want me to go or do you want to go first?
Yeah, I want to get inspired by your answer.
Okay, sounds good. So in my opinion, to be an educated cowgirl means that you are willing to take a growth mindset into both your personal world and your riding world and your horse's world, and combining them all together and saying, I am going to learn to improve myself for my horse and improve myself for my riding, and just try to take, whether it's podcast knowledge, written knowledge, inspiration from other riders, and just try to better yourself every single day that you go out to the barn. I think that's being an educated cowgirl.
Nice.
I totally agree. So I think that being educated, like I said, the internet is a very powerful tool, and there are so many resources out there to learn about literally any topic that you want to learn about. If you want to learn more about your horse's feet, I'm sure there's a farrier podcast out there, or I'm sure there's, some sort of Google or some sort of seminar on Google put together by a farrier. I know that locally at my local vet here in Portland, Oregon, they're always having educational seminars all the time. They bring out farriers, they bring out different sports medicine vets. There's so much education out there that really, there's so much education out there that it's, and I don't know how I want to say that. There's so many different ways to learn about so many different things out there. The On the Rail podcast does a great job about talking about different ways to educate and bringing on different professionals. You've also brought on a lot of different professionals. We bring on professionals. There's, if podcasts aren't your thing, then there's books, there's YouTube, there's a million ways to learn about all the topics that you want to learn about. And I think that, a lot of times people will give the excuse of, oh, I don't have the time to learn. It's like, well, you can learn when you're on the drive to the barn. You can throw on a podcast when you're on your horse. You know what I mean? There's lots of ways to learn without necessarily going to an in-person clinic or reading a book if you don't have the time for that. There's lots of different ways to, like there's lots of different types of education. If you're a reader, if you're a listener, if you're visual, there's lots of different ways.
Nice. Love it. Love it. All right. So we're going to end with some fun rapid fire questions. All right. So if you were on a deserted island, what is the one thing you would have to bring with you?
Other than my horse, probably a watermelon.
Okay.
A watermelon. That's a good, I don't think I knew that you liked watermelon so much.
I love it.
Oh my gosh. Am I going to be the person that says my phone? I don't know that I can go to a deserted island.
I don't know if you'd have service on a deserted island, but.
Oh, that's such a good point. Oh gosh. I think I'd have to bring a horse, honestly. I don't know what else I would bring. I'd have to bring a horse. Yeah.
You'd find a way to get in there.
Yeah.
All right. What is your biggest horse show ick?
Ooh. When people don't say thank you or you're welcome. When people don't say thank you. Like if you open the door for them, or if the gate person says, hey, here you go, it's your time. Just look over and say, thank you, I appreciate it. Or be nice to the office staff. Basically, just be nice.
Like it, yeah.
Mine is probably people who just, don't do a lot of it themselves. Like you go to the horse shows and there's some people who never pick out their stall, never saddle their horse, never throw in the pigtail. Everything's always done for them. And that's probably my biggest ick. I was always taught by my barn and by my parents that, hey, if you want to go to a horse show, then, or if you want to ride a horse, then you're going to have to do it all yourself.
Yeah.
And I think
or
that,
at least help.
yeah, like, okay, I totally get it. If you're, there's definitely some scenarios where you need help, right? Like, barn families and the horse community is so supportive and we all help each other out when we need it. But if you go back to the stalls and you hand me your horse and then go and sit down and watch me untack it, that gives me the ick.
Yeah. Yeah, that definitely it happens in a lot of breeds. Okay. So what book are you currently reading or recently read that you have to share with a friend?
So the most recent book I read is called Love Life by Matthew Hussey. It is so good. But the one that I always recommend to people is Relentless by Tim Grover. Amazing.
Nice.
Mine is called the subtle art of not giving a, and then there might be an F word.
Yeah.
That is my all-time favorite book. It just talks about like how to live your best life and not really care about what other people think about it, and to just set your mind to something and just go and do it and not really give a crap about what other people have to say about it.
Nice. All right. If you could wake up tomorrow with any superpower, what would it be?
Probably teleportation.
Nice.
A teleportation that can also teleport like horses, like also horse teleportation. Because my biggest dream is to like go and show at like the World Equestrian Center in Florida, and I live all the way in Oregon, so honestly we've looked into it and it's cheaper to fly the horses than to drive them there.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah,
that's interesting. Yeah, I always like 15-hour drives, and I'm like, and they always make stops in between, but I'm like, that's still a long way to go. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Last one. If you could have dinner with anybody, living or dead, who would it be?
it's a good question. I don't know.
I would say my mom's parents. They passed away when I was maybe 18, and I didn't get to spend quite as much time with them, but they had so much wisdom, and I feel like, especially at this point in life, they would be really great people to, connect with and see what their perspectives are on things, because they were really grounded and really humble and just hardworking people. And I think that would be really neat to see what they have to say.
Love that. Love that.
It's a great question. Trying to think of like a super inspiring like horse person. I don't know. I'd probably say like
it can be someone in a different industry altogether too.
Yeah. No, I'm even trying to think. Lauren, who comes to your mind when you think of like the most successful person in our industry?
Oh, in ours or just any? I would say maybe Andrea Fapani or Adon Van Willis.
Oh, yeah. Andrea Fapani. Oh, 100%. Yeah. Andrea Fapani. Just an animal. Yeah. Just an absolute animal. Like I'd want to talk with somebody who's at the very top of their sport and who works super hard day in and day out to get to the top. Yeah, that's Andrea Fapani.
Now that I think about it, at the top of their sport, I would think Laura Kraut, the show jumper. She'd be really cool.
She's great too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was trying to think of like an Olympian, but
she was at the Olympics.
Was she?
Yeah.
Oh, that's super cool.
She was like the oldest female Olympian at the Olympics.
Oh,
she's like 50,
cool.
58, 59.
Good for her. That's impressive.
Yes. All right, ladies, this has been so much fun. I've loved talking with you. You guys have such good advice about everything. For those that don't know, where can they find you or Elevate Your Ride?
So you can find us in all of pretty much our information by looking up Elevate Your Ride on Instagram or Facebook or Spotify, and that will have Lauren and I's information on there. But so my name is Ellie Stiller. You can look up Ellie Stiller on Instagram or Facebook and find my business page there, which is Lopin' Down the Rail Fitness.
And I'm Lauren Crivelli, and you can look me up as well. And my website is just laurencrivelli.com. So that's really easy. But all
And
that's on Elevate Your Ride.
And the website is just elevateyourride.co.
Yep, elevateyourride.co. Yep, that's the
Perfect.
website.
All right, thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having
really
us
fun
on today. Yeah, it was fun to be on the other side of it, to be interviewed.
Wow, wasn't that conversation so fun and amazing, and probably one of my favorite fun facts I have heard on the show so far. If you would like to find out more about Elevate Your Ride or contact Ellie or Lauren, I have put all their information that they shared in the show notes. You can find their podcast episodes, as Ellie said, on Spotify. Also, if you are loving this podcast, would you please do me a favor and leave me a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, and you may even get a special shout out on a future episode. Like this review from SASL81. I'm not a huge podcast fan, but these are great. The content varies from show to show, and you can hear the passion coming through. Highly recommend. That is so sweet. Thank you so much. Also, don't forget to screenshot and share the episode on your Instagram story and tag me at The Educated Cowgirl. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the Educated Cowgirl podcast. I hope you enjoyed it, learned something new, and will come back for more. But for now, stay blessed and ride on, cowgirls.